There are gifts you unwrap, and then there are gifts that unwrap you. Peel back the careful layers you've spent years pressing flat, and leave you standing in the middle of a room full of people, breathing in a way you forgot you were allowed to. Charlotte had stopped believing in the second kind. She'd gotten good at the first kind. Practical things, useful things, gift cards to grocery stores, a new coat, one size larger than last year's because she'd stopped noticing herself shrinking. She smiled at all of it the way people smile at funerals. Wide enough to be polite, tight enough to hold. Nobody knew what William had been doing for 11 months. Not her daughter. Not the neighbors who watched her lights go off at 8 p.m. every night. Not the nurses at the facility who'd started calling her by first name because she was there so often she'd started to feel like furniture. William knew, though. William always knew. What happened on Christmas morning in that small, underheated living room, with its plastic tree and its one working string of lights, didn't just move the people in it. It moved through them. This is the story of what love looks like when it's been working in secret for almost a year, when it doesn't announce itself, when it arrives quietly, wrapped in brown paper, and then refuses, absolutely refuses, to be anything less than everything. Start with part 1. I dare you not to feel it. I was keeping a log by then. Not because anyone asked me to. Because I needed somewhere to put the things I couldn't say out loud. I'd been doing it since March, writing down what I saw in that hospital corridor, in the waiting rooms with their too bright fluorescents and their coffee that tasted like warm beige. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a grief counselor or a chaplain or any of the roles people slide into in places like that. I'm a social services coordinator for the county, which means I carry a clipboard and I try to connect people to resources before the resources run out, which they always do, faster than the need. I'd seen Charlotte 11 times before I understood what I was actually looking at. The first time, I thought she was a woman in her late 60s having a difficult autumn. Second visit, a widow doing her best. Third, a woman hollowing out in increments so slow you'd only catch it if you were keeping a log. She came in every Tuesday and Thursday, reliable as a tide. She'd sign in at the front desk, same pen she pulled from the same pocket of the same olive green cardigan, and she'd walk down to room 114, where her husband of 41 years sat in a motorized chair, looking out a window that faced a parking lot. She never cried in the corridor. I noticed that early. Most families, they lose it in the corridor. The hallway becomes the place where the performance ends and the real thing comes out, bent over water fountains, pressing foreheads to walls, breathing in chunks. Not Charlotte. She'd compose herself before the elevator. By the time the doors opened on the second floor, she was arranged, ready. I asked a nurse once. The nurse said, "He can't see her cry." She decided that early. She decided he was going to see her fine. That's the kind of thing I write down. Her husband's name was Gerald, 73, Parkinson's advanced. The correlation between the man he'd been. She showed me pictures once. Broad-shouldered, standing in a boat somewhere, laughing with his whole face. And the man in room 114 was the kind of gap you could fall into. She didn't fall. She brought him soup in a thermos every Tuesday because she didn't trust the facility's soup, which was reasonable. She read to him from a legal thriller he'd have hated if he could follow it, but the sound of her voice was what he tracked. Not the words, her voice. Their son William lived 4 hours north. He called. He visited when he could, which was not as often as any of them wished it were, because he had a daughter with a medical situation of her own and a job with hours that ate the year. I knew this because Charlotte had mentioned it once, in the flat tone people use when they're defending someone they're also faintly furious at. He does what he can, she said. Not, he's wonderful. Not, he's always there. Just, he does what he can. That's love with a limp in it. Love that's been walking wounded for long enough that it's forgotten it was injured. I first noticed something was different about William in late October. I was in the corridor, I'm always in the corridor. It's where everything real happens. When he appeared. Unscheduled. A Tuesday. He'd driven 4 hours without telling her, which meant something. He was carrying nothing. No overnight bag, no fruit basket or flowers, the standard issue offerings people bring to feel useful. Just himself. Like in a jacket that needed replacing, with his mother's exact jaw and his father's eyes and an expression I couldn't name yet. He signed in. He went upstairs. 20 minutes later, he came back down. He sat in the lobby for a long time, picked up a magazine, didn't read it, put it back. I almost didn't ask. I almost did my job, which is to not make things heavier by acknowledging their weight. But there's a thing I do. My supervisor calls it a liability. My mother calls it a gift, where I sit next to people and wait. Not offering, just present. Like I'm not expecting anything. Like I have nowhere else to be. He started talking after 4 minutes. I was timing it because I time everything. It's a nervous habit that gives me something to do with my hands. He talked about his father, the legal thriller his mother was reading aloud. He talked about how his daughter's treatment was finally, the word he used was finally. He said it like it had been a long negotiation, stabilizing. He talked about not being able to be in 2 places at once. Then he said, I want to do something for her, for Christmas, something real. I didn't say anything. She's been... He stopped, picked up the magazine again. She doesn't say she's tired. You have to watch for it. She's got this thing she does with her hands when she's really tired. She puts them flat on her thighs like she's just laying them down, like she's setting something down. He demonstrated absently, without knowing he was doing it. She's been putting her hands down a lot. I wrote that down later. Verbatim. Because sometimes people say the most precise and devastating things without any idea that what they've just uttered is a complete and accurate portrait of someone they love. She was tired in the specific way caregiving makes people tired. Not sleepy, not depleted, but compressed. And like the person who existed before all of this had been folded into something very small and very dense, and was still alive in there, still functional, but running on a kind of fuel that couldn't be restocked at any ordinary supply. I told him I'd look into a few things. Resources, programs. It wasn't much. He shook his head. I'm not looking for programs, he said. I'm looking for... I don't know what I'm looking for yet. But I'll know it when I find it. He left. I went back to my clipboard. But I wrote his name down at the top of a fresh page. I do that sometimes. Give someone their own page. It means I think their story isn't over. It means I think the next thing they do is going to matter enough to track. William. New page. I didn't know yet what he was going to find, but the way he'd said something real, like he'd been storing the words for months, like they cost him something, that stayed with me. The way the truest things always do. And continued in part 2. What he built in secret. I have a tendency to underestimate people. My supervisor would call that professional awareness. My mother would call it damage. Either way, I noticed it acutely in November, because November was when William started calling me. The first call came on a Thursday, 7:14 in the morning, before I'd poured my coffee or turned on the overhead light. And when I was still sitting at my desk in that specific darkness that feels like the world hasn't committed to the day yet. He'd been thinking, he said. He'd been thinking about what his mother needed, not wanted. He was precise about that distinction. Wanted was manageable. Needed was the harder problem. Wanted was soup thermostat and warm slippers. Needed was something he'd been circling for weeks, something he couldn't name, arriving at only by process of elimination. She needed, he'd concluded, to be seen. Not helped, not relieved, not given a break, though a break would have been welcome. She needed someone to account for the full scope of what she was carrying. Not summarize it, not reduce it to a pamphlet or a referral, but account for it. Bear witness to it. Hold it up and say, I see all of this, every piece. I have been paying attention. Okay, I said. I was still in the dark. How? That's when he told me what he'd already started doing. He'd begun in January, he said, which stopped me cold because that was before his daughter's treatment escalated, before Gerald's last significant decline, before any of the events I'd have pointed to as catalysts. He'd started before there was a crisis, which meant this wasn't a reaction. It was a choice. An act of sustained, deliberate love that predated the urgency by almost a year. He'd been collecting her. That was the only word I had for it later, writing it down. Collecting her. And he'd called her childhood friends, the two still living, one in Arizona, one in a suburb outside Cincinnati, and asked them to write down their memories of her. Not condolence card memories. Not, she was always so kind. Specific ones. The kind you only carry if someone genuinely mattered to you. He'd asked for the embarrassing ones too, he said, because those were the ones that proved they actually knew her. He'd gone through the 41 years of Gerald and Charlotte's marriage in photographs his mother didn't know he'd digitized. He'd written to distant relatives. He'd contacted the church she'd attended before Gerald's condition made Sundays complicated, and spoken to a minister there who'd known her for 20 years and had, apparently, plenty to say. He'd asked Gerald's nurses, the ones she trusted, the ones she brought soup for at Christmas, to write down what they'd observed in her, the specific things, the texture of her care. Do they know what it's for? I asked. Some of them. I told them it was for her. I didn't tell them the format. The format, he explained, was a book. Not published, not printed by a press. Printed by him at a FedEx near his apartment, assembled at his kitchen table in the evenings after his daughter was in bed. A book of her. A record of the person Charlotte had been, was and was continuing to be, in the accounting of everyone she'd ever mattered to. And he'd written the introduction himself. He read me part of it on the phone. One paragraph, just one, because he was private about it, and I could tell he was embarrassed by the emotion in his own writing the way people get embarrassed by emotion they can't explain away. I'm not going to reproduce it here. Some things aren't mine to carry in a log. But I'll say this. He wrote about her hands, the way she put them flat on her thighs when she was tired. He'd seen that his whole life, he said. And he'd been seeing it since he was 8 years old, and knew even then that it meant something, even without knowing what. He'd named the book after nothing except her full name, on the cover. Charlotte Ann. The way her birth certificate read, the way Gerald had said it in arguments, which was apparently the only time he ever used her middle name, which made her furious and made her laugh in equal measure. Is that enough? William asked me. There was something genuinely uncertain in his voice. Not fishing for reassurance, actually asking. I keep thinking, what if she just cries and then feels worse? What if it's too much? I thought about the 11 months of Tuesdays and Thursdays. The olive green cardigan. The pen she always had in her left pocket. The way she arranged herself on the elevator. William, I said. Yeah. What you've just described to me took 11 months and involved at least 40 other people, and your father's nursing staff and a minister and 2 women in different time zones who haven't thought about her in years, and now they have because you called them. He didn't say anything. That's not a Christmas gift. That's an act of restoration. That's saying, I have gone through the record and I have found every piece of you that the last few years have covered over, and I am giving them back. And I hurt him breathing. You think she'll... I think, I said carefully, that you should wrap it in plain paper. Not the decorative kind. The brown kind. Because it's not decoration. And I think you should give it to her before the rest of the family arrives. While it's just the 2 of you. Because that's the only container big enough for what's going to happen. He was quiet again. Then, I didn't sleep well finishing it. But there's a page near the back from her friend in Arizona. And she wrote about the summer they were 22, and it's, I don't know. It's her before all of this. It's her before my dad got sick and before I was even born. And she's just... He stopped. She's just a girl in the summer, he said. I closed my log. Not because I'd run out of things to write. Because some things you just sit with. Some things you just let be what they are, without putting them anywhere. Without making them into data or documentation or a case number with a referral attached. A girl in the summer, still in there, waiting to be returned to herself. Continued in part 3. Christmas morning, room by room. I wasn't supposed to be there. I want to be clear about that. I had no professional reason to be in that neighborhood on Christmas morning. No clipboard justification. No referral chain that ended on a residential street with a plastic tree in the window and one working string of lights blinking out a slow, uneven code. I'd been invited. Charlotte had called me the week before. She had my number from the facility's resource board, where I'd pinned it 9 months ago in a moment of optimism. And her voice had that careful, arranged quality I recognized from the elevator. She said William had mentioned I'd helped him think something through. She said she didn't know what that meant exactly, but she wanted me to come if I could. If it wasn't strange. It's a little strange, I said. Yes, she said. Come anyway. I arrived at 7:40, before William's sister and her family, before the neighbors who'd been invited for coffee at 10, before any of the additional cast that Christmas assembles around itself like an organism building armor. It was just the 3 of us, Charlotte, William, and the brown paper package on the kitchen table. See, she was in the olive green cardigan. Of course she was. William had made coffee. He was doing things with his hands, straightening mugs, adjusting the position of the creamer, that had nothing to do with coffee and everything to do with having nowhere to put his nerves. He was 39 years old and he looked 17, and I understood that completely. The particular regression of standing in your mother's kitchen on Christmas morning with something enormous sitting on the table between you. Charlotte looked at the package once and then looked away. William. Merry Christmas, Mom. That's not wrapped right. I know. You used the brown paper for... I know what it's for. She touched the edge of it. Just the edge. Her hand was small against the paper. She wasn't putting her hands flat on her thighs, I noticed. She was reaching. Is it from the facility? And she thought it was paperwork. She was bracing. I could see her arranging herself the way she arranged herself on the elevator, composing, readying, already pre-grieving whatever news she'd convinced herself was inside. No, William said. It's not from the facility. It's from... Mom, just open it. She opened it like she did everything else. Careful, efficient, no wasted motion. She peeled the tape at the seam without tearing the paper, folded it back, and then she stopped. Charlotte Ann. Her own name on the cover. Not a card, not a pamphlet, a book. Real pages, real binding. Her name centered in a font William had spent 45 minutes selecting on a free website at midnight because the first 12 hadn't felt right. She picked it up. She read the cover twice. What is this? Not a question. The way you say something when the thing you're looking at doesn't have a category yet, when your brain is reaching for a shelf and finding no shelf. Open it, William said. She opened it, and I was watching his face, not hers. I was watching him watch her read the introduction, his own words, the ones he'd been embarrassed about, the ones with the hands in them. And his face was doing something I can only describe as loading. Like he was running a process too large for the available space. Like he was holding himself together with something thinner than he'd like. She read for a long time. She turned the page. She stopped. And the photograph he'd placed after the introduction was not from recent years. It was from 1987. Charlotte, at 31, standing in a garden somewhere, in the specific posture of someone who doesn't know they're being photographed. Head tilted slightly, laughing at something off frame, her whole face. She put her hand flat on the table, not on her thighs, on the table, like she needed something solid. William. Keep going. She kept going. I am going to tell you what I observed, clinically, That's because the clinical framing is the only way I can write about this without the log becoming illegible. She turned the pages slowly at first, then slower. Then she stopped turning and just held one page open, and I couldn't see from where I was standing what the page said. But her mouth was doing something. Not crying, not yet, but a kind of silent forming of words. Like her lips recognized something and were saying it back. It was the page from The Woman in Arizona, and the one about the summer they were 22. She sat down. She didn't look for a chair. Her knees found the floor first, and William was across the kitchen in under a second. I didn't see him move, just the result of movement, him on his knees next to her with his arms around her, the two of them on the kitchen floor with the book still open between them. I turned away, not because I'm a professional and it wasn't my moment. I turned away because I'm a person, and some things are walls between the world and the people inside them, and you don't breach those walls, even kindly, even with a clipboard, even if you've been invited. I looked at the plastic tree. The one working string of lights blinked its slow, uneven code. I thought about Gerald in room 114, facing a window that looked at a parking lot, with Charlotte's voice still tracking across the distance on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And I thought about a girl in a garden in 1987 who didn't know she was being photographed. I thought about 41 years compressed and then compressed again, all the way down to one room, one chair, one thermos of soup. I thought about what William had said on the phone in November. She's just a girl in the summer. And how he'd found her there in all that compression and decided to go get her. Behind me, I could hear the sound of them on the floor. Not crying exactly. Something past crying. Something that doesn't have a common name. I wrote later in my log that I had witnessed an act of love operating at a frequency most people never tune to. Not because they're incapable, because it requires 11 months of quiet and 40 other people and one minister and two women in different time zones and a kitchen table and a font you spend 45 minutes selecting at midnight because the first 12 didn't feel right. Charlotte came to the facility that Tuesday. She signed in with her pen. She walked down the corridor. She was still in the olive green cardigan, but she was carrying the book. She took it into room 114 and she read it to Gerald. Not the legal thriller, herself. End.